So studies have shown that ADHD affects our personality, and there are traits that those of us with ADHD share. The same thing goes for autism as well. That leads me to the question, how much of my personality is me, and how much is my neurodivergence? Hi everyone, my name is Lee and I'm a neurodivergent leadership coach. And last week I did a video all about how ADHD affects my personality. In that I critically evaluated 3 separate studies which found that the flavour of your ADHD, the combination of ADHD symptoms, actually affects your personality in different ways. If you haven't watched the video yet, I'd really recommend taking a look as it lays some of the groundwork to this video. But today I'm going to be exploring how much of our neurodivergence is our personality and how much is actually us. I'm someone who was relatively recently diagnosed with ADHD in the grand scheme of my life anyway, and when I look back, I see signs of it all over my personality. I've always been someone who's excitable and enthusiastic, something that comes from ADHD big emotions. I'm also bored easily, restless, impatient. These things that were part of ADHD I had internalized into character flaws. But they were just my ADHD. I've also always had lots of friends who are neurodivergent, and it's true that those of us who are similar tend to gravitate together. So it makes sense that I feel drawn to people with ADHD and autism, which is something I probably have as well. We have shared experiences, but also shared traits that bring us together. But of course, while we do have shared traits, we are very different people in our own ways. We all have our rich individual personality profiles. And while there are many people with ADHD and autism who I get on with, there are some that I just don't. We're all unique, and our ADHD or autism or other form of neurodivergence does not define who we are, but it contributes. So that leads me to the question, how much is it actually responsible for? This is going to be a difficult question to answer. To start with, everyone's neurodivergence presents differently. We can look at autism, which is on a spectrum of different traits, and people's symptoms show up differently on different aspects of the spectrum. Does that mean we can map someone's personality onto where they lie on the spectrum and define them based on that? In my deep dive last week on ADHD and personality, I looked at 2 different personality profiles. The one I'm going to take forward today and focus on is the 5-factor model, or the big 5 set of personality traits that look at extroversion, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, and openness to experience. Across the studies, themes emerged which suggest that ADHD could be highly correlated with conscientiousness and neuroticism. Some studies also show that agreeableness and extroversion might be correlated with ADHD as well. Typically, these studies tended to find that low conscientiousness and high neuroticism correlated with the inattentive aspect of ADHD, and agreeableness and extroversion tended to correlate with the hyperactive impulsive side. Which means that potentially we could do the same thing as I just speculated from autism, plot out where a person with ADHD falls on the different aspects of ADHD traits and build their personality based on that. However, you'll notice that I didn't mention anything at all just then about openness to experience. That's because openness to experience wasn't found to be correlated with any ADHD symptoms. That means that there's something, openness to experience at the very least, that is individually different between each person with ADHD, and our personalities aren't just derived by our symptoms. At least one aspect is purely idiosyncratic. It's also just not that simple. There are environmental factors that affect how our personalities develop. There are biases within self-report. But one thing that I didn't see come up at all in my research for this topic was about the different forms of neurodivergences and how much they overlap. Did you know that between 20 and 50% of children with ADHD also meet the diagnostic criteria for autism? The other way round is even higher at 30 to 80%. It varies depending on the study. Did you know that 50% of children with ADHD are diagnosed with a comorbid tic disorder, and between 35 and 95% of children with Tourette's syndrome also have ADHD, which tends to be visible much earlier. For dyslexia, there's a 25 to 50% overlap in both directions. When I first started reading these overlaps, it actually kind of blew my mind, because when you go for a diagnosis, they have to check that it couldn't be better explained by something else. So they ask you questions to rule out other forms of neurodivergence. And in fact, I got quite a few questions on autism, so obviously that was on my assessor's mind. But the thing is, no one ever asks the question, what if it's not just ADHD? What if it's ADHD and something else? Most studies, resources, conversations also talk about these things in isolation. They say people with ADHD tend to present in this way, people with dyslexia tend to present in that way. And I know I'm bad about that too. I talk about ADHD in isolation quite a lot on this channel. even though I know in the back of my mind it's not that simple. I imagine a lot of the time the reason why we do this is because the topic itself is just too complex. We need to break it down into smaller factors that we can understand to be able to build up those building blocks. When considering all these overlaps, it's easier to just ignore them. And on the side note, this is why I love coaching for people who are neurodivergent, because I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you, you have ADHD, so you should do this. You have autism, so you should do this. I'm responding to the whole person, to you, however you present, whatever your symptoms are, whatever your neurotype is. We work for you in your unique scenario instead of trying to make you fit into boxes. Because even if I was the foremost ADHD expert in the world, you might also have dyslexia, you might also have Tourette's, and these symptoms can conflict with ADHD. And so the best ADHD advice in the world might not work for you due to your unique flavor of neurodivergence. Instead, we work together to find out what does work for you. These overlaps increase the complexity exponentially. Now I don't just have to look at mapping my big 5 traits onto the different factors of ADHD, but I also need to look at the different factors of autism and take into account and control for any other potential neurodivergences that might be there that I don't yet know about. For example, one of the big 5 traits I've always resonated most strongly with is conscientiousness. I'm an incredibly hard worker, I'm ambitious, I'm organised, yet this is negatively correlated with my inattentive aspect of my ADHD. I work hard to be organised and build systems for my chaotic brain, and I'm driven, and ADHD personality correlations say that that shouldn't be the case. Is my potential autism making up for the ADHD when it comes to conscientiousness? Actually, some studies suggest not. So where does that come from? In the paper, Clinical Reflections on the Intersections of Autism and Personality Development, the author talks about the prevalence of diagnosing people with autism with personality disorders before autism is even considered. These diagnoses are actually often dropped once the autism diagnosis has been made. The author points out that these 5-factor models and general personality tests are built without the aspect of neurodivergence taken into account, and the same with diagnostic criteria for personality disorders. Now, you might be listening to me discuss this topic with interest, but thinking, well, Lee, isn't this just a bit self-indulgent? Aren't you just taking a very introspective question of what is my personality, what is my neurodivergence, and exploring that from a purely philosophical point of view? And yeah, I can see why you'd ask that question, but it does have real impact. And the real impact is in the world of employment and personality screenings. From what I can tell, there are no laws preventing employers from requiring candidates to take personality tests. Some companies argue that they're a good predictor of job performance or help them diversify and balance out their team. It's estimated that between 60 and 70% of Americans looking for jobs have taken personality tests in the last few years. The thing is, if we know that there's a correlation between our personalities and our neurodivergencies, and employers are using personality tests as part of their recruitment process, does that mean that neurodivergent people are being discriminated against in this part of the recruitment process? There's a really interesting 2023 article in the Kennedy Institute of Ethics journal. It's called Screening Out Neurodiversity, and it examines exactly this question. It focuses on autism and finds that while there's still not enough evidence to suggest that there is discrimination, there is enough to suggest that these personality tests prey unfairly on some aspects of autism. One of the things that's kind of scary here is this 2014 study used Big 5 personality tests to predict whether a certain group was autistic versus the typical control group, and found that they could actually manage to do that with 70% accuracy. So if a company is either knowingly or unknowingly filtering out autistic traits, they could be excluding autistic people in the personality test with 70% accuracy. What makes it hard to suggest for immediately outlawing these tests is the fact that they're actually not all that accurate. So while the Big 5 model itself is academically respected, the self-report tests are not quite so rigorous. One reporter took a particular Big 5 personality test twice, once saying they were a man, once saying they were a woman, and got quite different results each time. So there's a bias in some of these tests that are out there, even if the model itself is considered sound. On top of this, the Big 5 tests aren't actually what's being used most of the time. Most companies instead use the Myers-Briggs tests that have been popularized. These tests are known to be inaccurate and give inconsistent results when taken 5 weeks apart. In one study of over 1,200 students, they found that 83% of differences could not be explained by the Myers-Briggs personality tests. There's also the fact that self-report systems are inaccurate. Even for neurotypicals, the person taking the test and someone close to them filling out the questionnaire on their behalf can come up with different results that don't match up. For neurodivergent people, that can be compounded by interpretations of the questions. We might just read the questions and respond to them in a different way than what was intended by the neurotypical test setter. So I can't definitively answer the question of how much is me and how much is my neurodivergence. And really, does it actually matter? Because I know I am Lee, and all of the wonderful, amazing uniqueness that comes into being Lee, that are part my personality, part my neurodivergence, in some combination that I'll probably never know the answer to. And while it satisfies that mathematical itch in my brain to try and fit a model to it, I know ultimately that doesn't reflect who I am. I am a unique individual that has been shaped by my own life experiences, and neurodivergence is just one part of that. But on a societal level, the implication of neurodivergent discrimination based on these personality tests is a scary one, and it's one that we're only just starting to realise the implications of. There are enough things getting in the way of us getting the opportunities that we deserve. We don't need any more of them. And with AI on the rise, this situation is only going to get worse. So that's it for today. Speaking of algorithms, if you haven't seen it already, I'd really recommend going back to watch my How YouTube Diagnosed with ADHD video, because you might find this interesting as well. Please leave me a like and a comment, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you very much.